Hey, Charles here with Rocky Mountain, and today I'm going to show you how to rebuild your WP PDS shock. You can find these on a lot of KTM motorcycles, whether it's a dirt bike or like us, this came off our 790 adventure bike. And there's a few different versions of the PDS shock. Your reservoir could be in a different location, and some of the internals might look a little bit different, but overall the process will be very similar. Just use your model specific service manual throughout the process. And if you're not sure if you have a PDS shock, these are the shocks that mount straight to the swing arm, and it does all of your progressive damping with the internals, where if you have a linkage style shock, the linkage is what's giving you that progressive feel. So those are your differences. It's a straightforward process. Let's go ahead and jump into it. To get this done, we're going to use some lightweight shock oil. So this is the Racetech 2.5 to 5 weight. We're also using contact cleaner, high strength thread lock, seal grease, and then depending on what's wrong with your shock will determine what parts you need. So typically you're going to buy a complete seal head that comes with the dust seal and the oil seal, but you can buy those parts individually along with the bushings. Now you also want to take a look at your bumper while you're in there. That's a high wear item, and if you haven't replaced that recently, I recommend getting that done. Now you also need a way to fill your shock with nitrogen. There's a few ways to get that done, and if you plan on having a shop fill it up, you can just bring them the shock. But if you plan on doing it yourself, you have a few different options. So the one we're going with today is this Racetech nitrogen filling bolt. It's going to work with a nitrogen filling needle. That's going to be the least expensive option, but if you want to upgrade from there, you can get a reservoir cap. This has the Schrader valve, and then if you're racing and riding a lot, maybe you need to rebuild your shock often and get that fresh fluid in there. The bladder conversion kit from Racetech is something you want to look into. It's going to give you a more plush feel, and rebuilding the shock is going to be easier. Now, if you need any of these items, you can find them on our website. Just click the link in the description below. To get this done, you're going to need some common hand tools as well as some special tools. So first thing I want to talk about is the Tusk seal head setting tool. This is going to be a must-have to press your seal down and gain access to a clip. You're also going to want to have a seal bullet. This is an 18mm seal bullet, and it's going to prevent you from tearing your new seal on installation. Other than that, we're going to be using a drain pan, a measuring cup. I've got this syringe to fill my reservoir, but if you have a bladder conversion kit, you're not going to need one of these. Right here we've got our heat gun, tape measure, safety glasses, rubber gloves, rags, dead blow hammer. We also have a chisel, an air nozzle, side cutters, and then the spring compressors. They're optional. We have a few special tools right here as well. So we've got a depth gauge and a clip tool, clip removal tool. This one's from Racetech. It's real convenient to have. If you don't have that, you can use a pick. We're also using a flat blade screwdriver. And then up at the top, we have some sockets. So 22, 24, 19, and 17mm sockets. We've got a torque wrench, digital calipers, and then 3, 4, and 5mm T Allens. All right, first thing you need to do is pull your shock from your bike. If you have a dirt bike, it's pretty straightforward, but if you have a 790, 890, or even a Norden 901 adventure bike, we've got a separate how-to video, so you might want to check that out. That said, let's go ahead and jump into it. So first thing I'm going to do is count my clickers. So we're going to click these adjusters all the way clockwise until they lightly seat, and we're going to count those clicks. So we are 15 clicks out on the low speed compression. So I'm going to go ahead and back this out. And the reason you want to back these out once you've counted them, that's going to help you bleed the shock as you reassemble it. So I'll go ahead and write that down. Then we've got our rebound on the bottom. So this one, I'm only counting full clicks, so it was just barely past 14 on this. Then I'm also going to use a 17mm socket and just see where I'm at with my high-speed compression. So this is just going to be full turns. You're going to count them. If you have a paint pen, something like that, you can make a mark to get this exactly where you were. So we're about 1.5 turns out. Next thing we want to do is remove our spring. So on dirt bikes, it's pretty common to just back your adjuster off all the way. On this one, it's going to be easiest for us just to use some spring compressors, and that's going to allow us to remove this collar and retainer at the bottom holding the spring on. So to do that, I already have a vise with soft jaws. So I've just clamped that eyelet in there. And I'll go ahead and tighten down these spring compressors. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is if you're not using spring compressors and you're backing off that preload adjuster, what you want to do is take a measurement of your spring, and that way you can get it exactly where it was before you back that preload adjuster off. So we're at 199 millimeters. And then you're just going to compress that until you have enough room to remove these two clips, these half moons. And then we have that collar. And I'm just laying everything out in order. Now we can go ahead and remove our spring. The next step is to release your nitrogen. So most bikes, they're going to have an internal floating piston. We're using our 4mm Allen, and we're just going to crack this bolt loose. If you have a bladder conversion kit, it might just have a Schrader valve and you can depress that. So once all the pressure's out, you can go ahead and remove this bolt all the way. You can see that O-ring stuck on there. I'm going to pull that off. And I do want to point out that if you remove this and a bunch of oil is coming out, then you've got issues in here, and that's when you're going to want to look at that bladder conversion kit or getting this repaired. But what I want to do now, I want to take a measurement. So I've got a depth setting tool. So I'm going to put this all the way in there. I'm going to make sure the shock shaft is all the way up, and we're going to see how far that internal floating piston is sitting. I'm going to take that measurement, and that's where we want to be when we go back together. We want to be roughly this same depth to make sure we've done everything right. So I'm going to take that measurement. So we're 53 millimeters. Just going to write that down, and we can refer to it later. Next, we need to remove this cap. So I'm going to use a sharp chisel to pop this up. If you don't have that, you can use a punch in these little holes right there, but you run the risk of damaging them and kind of flaring them out just a little bit. So we'll go ahead and pop this up. I'm actually going to use a zip tie to hold this out of the way. So with the cap up, we do have a little bit of dirt down in here. We want to clean all that out. We're going to clean the rest of the shock up as well. So I'm just going to use some contact cleaner and spray it off. So once you have that little pre-clean done, what you want to do is take your seal head setting tool, and this one's double-sided. So with this being a bigger seal, we're going to use the larger end. Some dirt bikes are going to be using the smaller end. We'll go ahead and slide this into place. And then with this style, you're going to use the cap to press the seal head down just a little bit, and you're just exposing a circlip down inside. Once you have that exposed, you can go ahead and use your circlip removal tool or a pick. We're going to pop that clip out, and then we can pull the shock shaft out. Just keep in mind, you want to place your drain pan underneath before you do that, because you're going to get some oil coming out. So with the pan underneath, I'm going to pull this up just a little bit. I'm going to remove the seal head setting tool. Then I'm pulling this clip off as well. And we can pull this out. Just keep in mind, you're going to feel a little bit of vacuum pressure right there as it comes out. And again, just make sure you have your pan where it can catch all that spilled oil. Okay, next, bring the pan back up, body out of the vise, dump your fluid, and you can tell that fluid seems like it doesn't have that many hours on it, so that's good. But we still had that leaking seal, so we'll have to replace it. After that, going back in the vise. So right here we have our compression assembly. I'm going to be using my 24mm socket to remove that. And I've just got a second drain pan underneath. So it's going to create a little bit of a mess. And we can pull that assembly out. Then the last thing to remove from the top of the bladder is the bleeder bolt. Using my 5mm Allen. You might lose a little more fluid right here as well. Then we're going to remove the shock body from the vise, see if we can dump out any more fluid. Then we're going to disassemble the shock shaft. So to get this thing disassembled, we need to heat up this top nut. Then I've got a 19mm socket to remove it. We're going to lay all of this in order. Now I'm going to take a screwdriver, and we've got this piston and shim stack. I'm going to leave that on the screwdriver. You want to make sure it stays in order. Then we've got a collar, and then I'm going to use my 22mm wrench. I've got a nut. Need to loosen this one up. So right here we've got a washer, a rebound stack, our piston, compression stack. There's going to be a washer underneath. I would recommend sliding all of this up at once. We're going to slide it onto another screwdriver or pick. And we've got our seal head assembly, that little zip tie, our cap, and finally our bumper. Now from here we need to clean up all of our parts. We're going to give them a quick inspection and get everything ready for assembly. And if there's any Loctite on these threads, you want to make sure you get that cleaned off. You can use a little wire brush or something like that to help out. And on the shock body, just want to wipe up down here by where that retaining clip goes. A lot of times there can be grime stuck. Then I'm also wiping out right by the threads where that compression assembly goes in. We'll spray it out, and the only place I'm not really going to spray is down into our reservoir. Spraying this outside off too because it's super oily. Then we'll just go through all of the parts the same way and make sure they're cleaned up. With everything cleaned up, we're going to make some inspections. So I'm going to look at the shock body first, make sure it's not cracked. Now, if you saw when you dumped the fluid, if it looked like it was gray or black with metal flakes in it, you're going to want to be taking a close look inside and making sure that the anodizing isn't worn through on that shock body. So we're looking down in there, even though our fluid came out clean. The anodizing looks good. You'll notice it, if it's worn through, you're gonna see a different color of material halfway down in the shock body. So we're looking good here. We'll go ahead and move on to the shock shaft. So you wanna make sure the chrome's in good condition. If you see any spots that look like they're worn down, you might wanna get this replaced. If you see a little pit or a little nick in the chrome, you can dress that up with a little bit of fine sandpaper. But it's really not that common to see that on the shock shaft. If it's really bad, or if you think this is bent, then obviously you're going to be replacing this part. But this one is looking good. Other than that, the seal head, we're going to be replacing this as an assembly. There's a bushing down in there that if you decide to rebuild this, you can take a look at the bushing. It's got kind of a red coating. If that looks like it's worn through, that's when you want to replace that as well. And then obviously take a look at your O-ring, and then hopefully you'll be replacing your seals on this, both the oil and dust seal. But again, we're putting a complete assembly. That's the easiest way to get that job done. Now, moving on, we've got our bumper. So if your bike, if you haven't done this within the last 5 years or so, probably want to get it done anyway. You can also look for any damage, whether this is cracked or crumbling apart. Now we're going to take a look at our bushing on this piston. So this bushing, you can see the ends kind of have a bronze color to them. If it looks like that all the way through, then this thing is worn out and needs to be replaced. Other than that, really with the shims, you just want to make sure they are cleaned up. There's rare occasions that they can kind of deform and bend a little bit, but you should, or that should be pretty obvious if you see any damage going on there. So all these parts are looking pretty good. We've got our new parts over here. So we've got our bumper, the seal head, and that bushing as well. With that said, we're going to start with reassembly. We're going to slide our new bumper on. We've got our cap. I'm going to cheap out and reuse this zip tie right here. And then what we're going to do, we've got the new seal head assembly, and you want to make sure that you have plenty of grease in here. These come pre-greased. And with this, the shaft, it does have a little bit of a taper, but you want to make sure that you don't cut your new seal, because that's going to defeat all your work. So you probably want to use one of these seal bullets. So we've got that dust seal facing down. Then I'm going to go ahead and slide this into place. So on video, I know it shows probably just a quick spray on these shims, but spend a little bit of time, kind of separate them, get them real clean. And then we'll take the screwdriver, make sure that it stays in contact with the shock shaft so nothing gets out of order. And then we're just going to work the stacks, the piston, and everything else onto the shaft, and make sure it's in the same orientation that you took it off. Then we have our nut and that flange. It's going to be facing up. This one doesn't get any Loctite on it, and we're going to torque it to 29.5 foot-pounds. This is our 22 millimeter socket. On your bike, it might be a little bit different. Now for this bushing, this one we were looking at, it doesn't look bad, but our kit came with a brand new one, and we don't plan on going in here anytime soon. So I'm just going to go ahead and get it replaced. We've got that O-ring right there. I'm just going to make sure it's in good condition. A little shock oil on it, or in our case, we've got a little bit of seal grease. Put the new bushing on. And with this, at this point, you want to take a look at your shim stacks and make sure there's no gaps in the shims. Make sure there wasn't any lint from rags that got stuck in there. You don't want them to hang open. These are looking good. Now, I do want to point out every now and then there's a crossover shim, and you might see a gap at that point, but it should be obvious if it's a crossover shim or if there's a piece of dirt or lint holding a shim open. Next, we have a spacer. This has a stepped edge and a little ring. The ring is going to go down if you have your shock shaft facing up like this. So then we have our next shim stack and piston. Slide that on. And then with this nut, if you used any solvent on it, just make sure it's completely dry. And then we're just going to use a little bit of high strength thread lock on here. It might be a different color depending on which brand of thread locker you are using. And we're just going to use a drop in there. We don't want the thread lock to get all over those shims. So now we can screw this nut on, and that's just going to center that piston up. And you know, this top piston, it's going to look different from bike to bike. So some of them, you're going to have a larger diameter shaft, and there's a needle that sits in the shock body that goes inside of there and helps create some of that progressive damping feeling. So again, it might look a little different from shock to shock, but the steps are pretty similar. And then this top nut, that's going to be torqued to 22.1 foot-pounds. So at this point, we have the shock shaft ready. Now what I want to do is prep the shock body. So first thing we're going to be doing is reinstall that compression assembly. So as I install things, I'm just going to make sure they're nice and lubed up. I'm going to open this fork oil or shock oil, put a little bit in a cap that I can dip into, and then I'm going to apply this to the O-rings. First, we have this section of the assembly. Make sure you don't lose that spring. I'm going to slide this into position. And we've got another O-ring on this cap. You want to make sure you don't forget this washer. Last little O-ring on the inside of that cap. Get some oil on there. And then we're just going to torque this to 25.8 foot-pounds. Now if I flip this to the other side, what I want to do now is I'm going to take this depth gauge. We're going to go ahead and press that all the way down, and then we're going to take a depth measurement. So we're 60 millimeters right there. Now if you remember when we first took it apart, we were at 53. So that means the piston was down 7 millimeters, or pushed down 7 millimeters by oil. And I believe that's how this came from the factory. I don't think anybody's been in this bike before. But with that being said, your manual, it's gonna tell you that it's gonna be about 5 millimeters down. So as long as you're right in that range, you should be good to go. The next thing we wanna do is clamp our shock body in the vise. So we've got this bleed hole at the top, and I'm gonna take my depth setting tool. I'm gonna press that piston all the way down. And then this is where we can use our syringe. We're gonna fill this reservoir with our shock fluid. So I'm just using a measuring cup, put some of that in there. Got my syringe. You just want to fill the reservoir until it's overflowing. You can let that fluid sit for a second, let any air bubbles work to the top. Next, we're going to take our bleeder bolt, make sure the O-ring's on it and in good condition. We'll go ahead and install that and tighten it down. And I'm going to lightly clamp this shock body in the vise. And our PDS shock, it has the horizontal bladder or horizontal reservoir. Some of these have the vertical. And in that case, you can mount this in the vise straight up and down. But what we're gonna do, we're gonna take our depth gauge, we're gonna press in on that floating piston. That's gonna push any air bubbles up through the reservoir and through our compression assembly and into the shock body. So from here, we're gonna fill this with shock fluid until we've got about an inch from the top. And with that topped up, you can tip this back just a hair. On ours, a couple bubbles came to the top. All right, now the next step is for us to install the Racetech nitrogen filling bolt. So depending on your shock, you've got two options. You can either use this bolt or you can do that bladder conversion kit. Again, that's gonna be a separate video. But for us, what we're gonna do, we're gonna take this bolt. We've got an O-ring that came with it. We'll go ahead and put that on, putting just a little bit of oil on that O-ring. Set the washer on, and that's just gonna make sure that you don't completely crush that O-ring, that you get a good seal. So now I've got my 3 millimeter Allen. I'm gonna thread this into the reservoir. We're just gonna snug that up. And we've got our nitrogen filling needle, and this bolt, it has a little bit of grease in there. But if yours is dry for any reason, feel free to apply some grease or lube to that needle. Slide that all the way through. And then I'm just taking our shock pump, and we're gonna pump this up to 40 to 50 PSI. And that's just gonna make sure that the piston inside of here doesn't move while we bleed the shock. So now we can start the bleeding process with the shock shaft. So I'm applying just a little bit of oil to that ring right here for the bushing. And keep in mind, this rebound adjuster on our shock, it was on the opposite side of our compression adjuster. So we're just gonna start with everything in that orientation. You might have to press in on that piston ring band as it goes into place. We've got the drain pan underneath again. Some oil is going to drip out. And then I want to point out the shock shaft has 2 holes on the sides of the shaft here. So once those are submerged, you want to make sure they stay submerged in oil. And then from here, we're going to move the shock shaft up and down slowly. That's going to help bleed any bubbles out. And then once you think you have all the air bubbles out, it's a good idea to let everything sit for 5 or 10 minutes. And then what you want to do here is make sure you pull this shock shaft up as high as you can go without exposing those 2 holes in the side of the shaft, ones I mentioned before. You're going to make sure this fluid is topped off all the way. I'm going to try to level this out just a little bit. The whole goal here is to make sure we don't get any air trapped inside the shock. So with that topped off, I'm going to take the nitrogen needle, I'm going to put this back in, and then what we're going to do, we're going to start to slide the shock seal down. You want to keep the shaft up, and this should hydrolock just like that. So from here we can get our seal head setting tool. I'm going to set this in place, and then to get the seal head to go down, what we're going to have to do is release some air pressure here. And we're just pressing this far enough that we expose that groove for our clip. So I'm going to install that clip. I heard it snap into place. I'm going to pull up on that shock shaft and remove the seal head setting tool. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and pull that needle, and I'm actually going to remove this bolt we've got in the end. And this is where you can double check your depth. So with that piston all the way in, as far as it can go, shock shaft is all the way up. And I'm going to take my measurement. So I'm almost 46 millimeters. So with that, we have too much oil in here. So we're going to have to reposition the shock. I'm going to put that bleeder at the highest point. So the full depth of our piston inside the reservoir was 60 millimeters, and we want to make sure that we end up 5 millimeters less than that. So I've set my depth gauge, set the O-ring to 55 millimeters. I'm going to crack this bleeder bolt open, and with that open, I'm going to push the piston up until the O-ring hits that reservoir body. So from here, I'm going to do one final check. Shock shaft all the way out. We'll measure the depth. So we're at 55 millimeters. We know we're good. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall my bolt. Just make sure that washer is centered up on the O-ring. Next, I'm going to get rid of the zip tie. I'm going to wipe out any excess oil from here. And then these holes on the cap, I'm going to line the holes front to back so they're in line with these eyelets, and that way one of the holes is going to be at the lowest point, and if any moisture or anything gets in there, it can drain out easy. And I'll use my deadbolt hammer to tap this on. Then I'm just going to wipe this up, and I'm going to fill it with nitrogen. Every bike, the pressure on that is going to be different, but you could be anywhere from 150 PSI all the way up to 225. So that's something you're going to check your manual for. On ours, we're going to be at 225. Now that we have this filled with nitrogen, what we want to do is press down all the way. We're going to go all the way through the range of motion. Make sure it extends all the way on its own and it goes smoothly. So this one's looking good. We can reinstall our spring. And from here we have our collar to install our half moons. And then we just need to release the pressure on our spring. And then from here, we need to reset our clickers. There you have it. That's how you rebuild the shock on your WP PDS. If you have any questions, leave those down in the comments. And if you need any of the parts we used today or oils, we've got that stuff on our website. Just click the link in the description below. And hey, if you want to see more helpful content like this, subscribe to our channel. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Thanks for watching.